In this episode, we're going to talk about Azure AD's conditional access and discover why it's such an important component in Microsoft's Zero Trust strategy for security. So if you're ready to learn, you've come to the right place. Greetings fellow YouTubers, welcome to the channel. How are you? I hope that you're all keeping well. Well, today I thought we'd take a look at Azure AD's conditional access and really talk about it from the ground up and learn why it's such an important component in Microsoft's Zero Trust security strategy. Now, before we start, I just want to mention, by the way, that Microsoft Copilot will be launched very, very soon, and Microsoft are starting to kind of leak out some of the information about its pricing and availability. Now, although we all kind of knew that it was going to be a premium feature, you will need to have certain Microsoft 365 SKUs. So you're going to need to have a business standard, business premium, E3 or E5 subscription in order to take advantage of it. Now, what we don't know yet is what the additional fees are going to be. Now, in addition, of course, we also have Microsoft Security Copilot, and this is something that you'll definitely need the E5 or EMNS license for. So this is going to be quite a premium feature, and I kind of get the feeling it's going to sit alongside products such as Defender for Endpoint and also Azure Sentinel in order to get the most out of it. Now, in terms of costings yet, we've not learned anything yet, so as soon as I find out something, I will of course let you know. Now, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, then shame on you. Bump that subscribe button up there, ring that bell, and come on board and join our great learning community. We really do appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this session, then of course bump the like button. It really does make a difference to my channel. So I think without any further ado, we're going to go and jump in. First of all, just a little bit of chat about exactly what conditional access is and how it works. And then we're going to do a deep dive with a detailed demo. So definitely stick around. You'll definitely learn something. Now, I've time coded the session, so if you want to jump in and out each of the sections, then please do so. So in the meantime, you enjoy. So let's talk about exactly what conditional access is. Now, in the old days, you would get access to a restricted area by the use of a single mechanism, such as a PIN code or a fingerprint or something like that. Likewise, if you were going to access a computer system in the 1990s, you would have just required a username and password. Nowadays, though, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and that's fine as a single form of authentication. Now, of course, Microsoft have recently enforced multi-factor authentication, and multi-factor authentication helps, but that just simply authenticates you. Now, there are situations where you might need a little something more, and this is pretty much where conditional access comes in. Now, it certainly forms part of Microsoft's Zero Trust strategy, which means it enforces a secure authentication, which is now what we have with multi-factor or passwordless authentication. But what about conditional access and identity protection? Well, these are two super important components that really can improve the security of your organization. So what does conditional access actually do? So when a user authenticates with their username and password or multi-factor authentication, it then goes into a secondary mode and it listens to say, let's say, is the user a member of a specific group, or is the user a guest user? Is the user, do they have an admin role, for example? Are they trying to access a particular app from a particular device in a particular location? And literally, Azure and conditional access monitors literally terabytes and terabytes of information coming in. So based on those conditional access policies or signals, it then renders a decision. So it evaluates the decision and essentially analyzes your risk as a potential user and will either allow access, deny access, or require something a little more. Now, in addition, you can also restrict exactly what the user can do on a particular app. So, for example, you don't want the user accessing, let's say, the ability to download files or the ability to take screenshots. So, conditional access essentially listens to signals. Now, in the old days, we used to have something similar called ADFS, or Active Directory Federation Services, and this used something called claim rules. And the claim rules were like, for example, if you were a member of a particular group or had a particular role. So it was very, very similar to conditional access, and in fact, this is the more modern approach to it. So you can use conditional access in a number of different situations, including for privileged admin roles, for guests, for example, enforcing trusted locations. And of course, now Microsoft also supports IPv6 as well as IPv4 locations. So essentially, it monitors these signals, and that's the key word here. It verifies every access attempt. So every access attempt from a user, a device, or even an application. So I think without any further ado, let's dig in and take a look at conditional access. Okay, so I'm kicking off here in the MicrosoftEntra Admin Center, and I'm going to come into Azure Active Directory. I'm going to scroll down to the Protect and Secure blade. And really, to talk about conditional access, we really do need to mention identity protection, because of course both work hand in hand in terms of providing verified trust. So I'm going to click into identity protection, and really there are two policies that we really need to be concerned with here. The first one is the user risk policy, and I like to think of this as a basket of really important critical employees. You know, those employees that are just absolutely so important in your organization. And let's face it, typically hackers would tend to target these users above all others. So we're talking about things like senior management, directors, IT, admins, accountants, and so on. So you can see here I've got 3 of our employees, critical employees, and I've basically placed them into a bucket and I've labeled them high risk. And I'm basically saying here, if there is any kind of suspicious access, then I can block access or, of course, require a password change. Now, in this case, I'm going to err on the side of caution, and I've now enabled this policy. So that's really where we're up to here. The second of the policies is what sign-in risk do these users present. So again, I've added the same users into the same bucket. Again, I've labeled them high risk. But this time I'm requesting multi-factor authentication. So should anything untoward happen, then I'm going to kind of request just that little bit of more assurance from them. Now, in addition to identity protection, of course, I'll show you conditional access. So conditional access here, again, conditional access is going through a number of changes, and I'll talk about some of these in a moment. So what are some of the first things that you want to configure? Well, certainly named locations are super important, and you can either add in a named location by GPS. So in this case, I've gone ahead and added in Norway. You can also bring in IP address ranges as well. So for example, let's say it's a specific office, then I can name the location. So for example, I'll call it Oslo, and you can mark this as a trusted location. Now, when you add in the range, you can either bring in an IPv4 or the new IPv6 ranges, which has just been announced by Microsoft, which, to be honest, is much more likely than what you'll do now. And if you're not sure about IPv6s, then I'm going to be doing a session on this in the not too distant future, so watch out for that. So in essence, all we do is add in the IP address ranges of our various trusted locations. So that's what we mean by a trusted location. Okay. Now, in addition to that, other things that we might want to control, you might want to configure, let's say, your own authentication strengths. So you can see here we have the 3 standard policies that come with conditional access. And you've got multi-factor authentication, passwordless MFA, and phishing resistant MFA. Now, to be honest, in most cases, these are going to be pretty good. However, if you do want to add in your own authentication strength, then of course you can do that. So I'm going to call this my corp auth strength. So I'm going to say which of these authentication mechanisms do I want to include. So for example, phishing resistant MFA, passwordless MFA, multi-factor authentication. I want to use all of these. This time, however, I'm not going to allow the likes of single factor authentication. So I really do need both of these features in place. So I'm going to click onto that, and you can see it gives me a nice review. And again, I'm going to go off and create my own authentication strength. Now, once you've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in to my conditional access policies. And at this point, I'm ready to create a policy. Now, you can do this either by going to the new policy and creating a blank policy, or you can choose a new policy from a template, and I'll come back to that in a moment. In addition, if you've scripted a conditional access policy using the new Microsoft Graph PowerShell module, you can then import that in here, and that's currently in preview. Now, if you want to know how to do that, there is a really nice article here that will take you through to learn.microsoft.com, so definitely check that out. First thing we'll do then is let's go ahead and create our new policy then. I'm going to call this policy Oslo CA1 policy. Now, as I've mentioned, it's all about signals, and those signals start with users. So are you looking to target all users or selected users and groups? I must warn you against potential use of all users, as this may affect admin accounts as well. So just make sure that if you've got any kind of multi-factor authentication, be careful that you think about how it's going to implement with an admin account, because the last thing you want is to lock yourself out of your account. That would be a potential nightmare. Now, in addition, we also have different types of users as well. So if you wanted to create a policy for, let's say, guest or external users, that can be quite useful for visitors to site, for example. Directory roles, so you can do directory roles. So if you wanted somebody to be, let's say, a Teams admin or a Viva admin or something like that, then again you can create a conditional access policy for them. And of course you can have lots of different policies for lots of different types of users as well. For this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do users and groups. And of course, we're in Oslo. So I'm going to just type in Oslo here and let's have a look. So I want to bring in my Oslo HR project, Oslo Engineering, and my Oslo Office, which are all groups and teams. I'm going to select those. So that's the first signal that I'm looking for. Now, the target resource, so the resources can be either applications, they can be user actions, and this can be quite useful if you're using things like HR systems, so when a user leaves, when they join, and so on. We also have a new private preview. This is Global Secure Access, which is currently in preview, and that will be covered by me in a future session. Authentication context, I mentioned that. So if an application, let's say SharePoint, is managing or dealing with sensitive data, you might want to create it using that. For this demo, I'm going to choose Cloud Apps. Remember that Cloud Apps relate to all your cloud-based applications, but you can, of course, customize that. And of course, if you're using the likes of Microsoft Intune, it can integrate with that as well. So I'm going to say, do you want to select a specific app, or do you want to select all apps? We also have a new filter feature here as well, and you can use dynamic filters. Just to remind you, by the way, in addition to the admin role that I'm using, you need to make yourself a member of the attribute administrators role for this to work. And this is basically if and or rules. So this is dynamic attribute rules, which is awesome, by the way. The other thing that we've got is I can just go ahead and select the particular app, so the individual apps here that I want to use. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to choose all cloud apps. Okay, so the users, the apps, what about the conditions then? So remember we talked about identity protection at the beginning of this session. So I'm going to say, yep, I want to set this for high and medium use. User risk, I want to set a sign-in risk of high and medium. And again, you can create different policies here, of course. You can also choose a specific device or device platform. So again, I can include all devices or exclude. In this case, I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to do an iOS device, a Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and a Windows Phone device. This could also include Teams as well. I'm going to click on Done. And locations. Now, of course, we talked about trusted locations or named locations earlier, and this can be really useful. So the last thing you want your users to do is have to constantly do MFA if they're in a trusted location. So again, I can say, you know, I want to actually exclude all trusted locations, or I can choose those specific locations as well. Please note we also have a new feature which is currently in preview. This is all compliant network locations. So if you're deploying Intune, again, you can do compliance. So it's testing the compliancy of those devices as well. This particular tenant, I haven't deployed any devices. That's the reason why it's grayed out. Okay, so I'm excluding all trusted locations here. Client apps. Now, when we talk about client apps, of course, obviously your users will be accessing the apps in the browser. They'll also be using mobile apps and desktop clients. Be very careful of this though. Things like Exchange Active Sync or older clients, maybe older Outlook clients, these don't support modern authentication mechanisms, aka they only support usernames and passwords. And this can be a potential, in fact, not just a potential, a real security risk. So definitely watch out for that. All right. I really like this as well. You can also filter for devices. So by filtering for devices, I can say, you know, I can choose, let's say, a specific device manufacturer. So I could say if it's a Dell manufacturer, I can then say if the device ownership might equal, let's say, personal devices. And you can see based on these if and or rules, you can create a policy for that. So, I mean, check it out. You could even do like, for example, a device ID. You could allow only very specific devices to actually connect to your network. This is super powerful, by the way. I love that feature. All right, so filter for devices. So based on those conditions, of course, are we going to grant access or block access? So if you're going to grant access, am I going to require multi-factor authentication, the device to be marked as compliant? So if you're using compliant rules in Intune, if you're using hybrid joined devices, I've covered that in previous sessions. And again, does the app, is it a list of approved apps? And are you using app protection policies as well? You'll notice that the authentication strengths is disabled. That's because it's one or the other. So if I clicked on the authentication strength, click on the drop down arrow, and you can see here is where I can add in that corp authentication strength that I created earlier. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to require multi-factor authentication. And of course, that will affect everyone except trusted locations. Now, the final thing here is you can also grant sessions as well. So you can use app enforce session restrictions. You can use for things like preventing a user from downloading a file, from copying and pasting and things like that. You can also use conditional access app control. So if you just want to monitor or block downloads on the device, for example. You can also create what we call or control the sign-in frequency. So I'm sure that you've signed into browsers in the past and it says, hey, do you want to keep me signed in? Well, you can control how long that user can sign in for here. That's quite useful. Things like continuous access evaluation, super powerful. What this does is it works alongside all the other Microsoft security components. And in essence, if there's anything that looks untoward, it will prompt the user to re-authenticate using multi-factor authentication. Resilience is for disaster recovery. So again, this can be quite useful. It allows you to put in a disaster recovery script if you've got one. And also token protection for sign-ins. Again, this is currently in current preview. So if you're using, you want to provide that token protection, that is available here as well. So now that I've created my conditional access policy, I can either deploy it, I can leave it off, or I can deploy it in reporting only mode. It's almost like a try before you buy type scenario. And I think that's always a really good idea to go ahead and do that, by the way. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch on that policy. And a really useful thing, by the way, is if you want to know how it's going to affect a user or a group or something like that, then you can use this what if tool. So this is really useful. So again, you can select a user or a guest user or a group or something like that. So you can then say, okay, what if, what would basically happen? So you basically fill in the IP address details here, and it would say, what if Adele logged in, would she get access, would she not get access, and so on. So that's really useful. Now, in addition, we can also monitor the logins as well by using these sign-in logs. So you can see that these are all the sign-in logs from our users. And it's really interesting because when the user signs in, it gives us the user's detail, shows us the location where they're coming in from, and the device information. So for example, I'm using a Mac OS device here. How am I authenticating? So, and also, is conditional access hitting me? So which policies are affecting me either live or in reporting mode? Okay, so very, very cool. And it's very useful to go in and have a look at those sign-in logs on a regular basis. Now, finally, the last thing that I want to mention, as well as creating a conditional access policy here, you can also create an access policy from an ever-increasing number of templates. So you can select the templates here, and there's a whole bunch of different templates. So everything from Secure Foundation to Secure Trust, Remote Work. If you're looking to protect the administrator account, again, be careful with this one, plan them carefully, as well as potential emerging threats. So there's a whole bunch of different templates. But as I said, before these go live, I would definitely try any of them out with the what if scenario. And of course, if you've got any problems with conditional access, you can always get help by submitting a support request. So there you have it, Azure AD's Conditional Access. I really hope that you enjoyed that and that you got a lot out of it. Now, any comments, questions about this or any of my other sessions, as always, just get those down below. And if you've not subscribed, we'd love to have you on board. So hit that subscribe button up there, ring the bell and come and join our great learning community. That's it for today. You take care and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.